Hi everyone, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at the World War I solitaire war game, The Twelfth Battle, designed by Herman Luttmann and published by Hexasim Games. In this game, you command the German and Austrian forces at the famous Battle of Caporetto. But what was the Battle of Caporetto, you might ask? Let's set the historical context. The Battle of Caporetto is a month-long campaign that started on October 24th, 1917, along the Italian front in northern Italy. A combined force of Austrian and German troops, notably employing stormtrooper tactics and poison gas, broke through the Italian defensive line. Italian military cohesion subsequently collapsed, which led to a 90-mile retreat to the Piave River. Italian casualties were staggering, roughly 13,000 dead, over 250,000 troops taken prisoner, and mass desertions and supply losses. In response, the Allies dispatched British and French divisions to reinforce the Italian front, but in the end, Italy was able to contain the offensive at the Piave River. Historians widely regard Caporetto as Italy's most catastrophic defeat in World War I, calling it unprecedented in scale and impact. To win this solitaire game, you, as the Austro-German commander, have to do better than the historical result.
Let's do a general overview of the game as we look at the components spread out in front of us. Most importantly, the 12th Battle is a solitaire game where you take charge of the attacking Central Powers against the defending Italians and their eventual allies. The goal is to outperform the historical result by taking more ground and destroying more defenders than happened historically. Game length is about 2 hours. Now, historically, each of the 10 turns in the full scenario represents several days, and the entire campaign represents about 2 months of historical time. Unit scale is operational, with each of the several armies in the campaign split up into 2 to 7 counters. Let's highlight the major mechanics in the 12th Battle. To start with, this is a point-to-point map, so your units will be moving along transit routes that connect various zones as you attempt to push the Italian forces back. Gameplay is turn-based, and each turn consists of alternating phases where you'll activate a portion of your Austrian and German forces, then the Italian, French, and British forces will do the same. Play goes back and forth like this across phases until all sides have activated their units, at which time play will continue on to the next turn. Now, in these turns, your forces will roll to determine how many activation points you'll get to use that turn. You then decide what army to activate, pay activation points to perform actions like moving and attacking with your units. When you run out of activation points, the phase shifts to the Allies. Victory is victory point based in the game. For the most part, you get victory points for capturing objectives and wiping out Allied forces. And at the end, if your victory point total is higher than the 125 point historical victory point level, you'll have won the battle. Now, there are 2 different types of combat, bombardment and assault. Combat is also dice throwing, hit based, where you'll have a number of dice to throw depending upon the strength of your attack. The results will compare to the enemy's defense strength, and you'll cause morale checks and hit point losses on the enemy. And speaking of losses, they are step-based with a high degree of nuance. Units can have as many as 10 steps between full strength and eliminated. And the system works by using 2 sides of each counter and a set of step loss markers that we'll take a look at in a little bit for shaken, disrupted, depleted, and broken status levels. Your enemy, the Allied forces, are all card-driven. When it's the Allies' turn, they'll draw a card, look at the currently active Allied army chit, and then execute the actions for that army based on the orders on the cards. It's a straightforward system that looks very elegant and easy to execute. Now, as one would expect in a World War I game, trenches are modeled in the game and give the defenders some strong advantages. Lines of communication as well are a mechanic in the game, so keeping your forces with clear lines of communication back to your supply sources is key for effective military operations. The game also adds some unique events for both sides to create some variability in gameplay. There are some unique units in the game for both sides as well. The Central Powers have powerful stormtroopers and heavy artillery to get your offensive unstuck. The Allies have trench garrisons, city garrisons, and rearguard units to delay and frustrate your attempts to advance. All in all, there feels like there is a good blend of depth and playability in this game. Let's take a look at the rulebook to get a sense of complexity and ease of learning. So it is 24 pages long, but the text is fairly large with a lot of white space present. There's also a number of graphics, some good examples, and then some designer notes to supplement and ease the learning process. Now, I've read through the whole thing, and it probably took me about an hour. And although playing any game is the real test, the writing here feels very clear, and I felt like I had a pretty good sense of how to play the game after reading the rules. So I'm fairly optimistic this will be a smooth gameplay to learn. For complexity, I'm tempted to go with a 4 out of 10, but I feel like the clarity of the writing is going to make this more a 3.5 out of 10. There's a few things to keep in your head as you execute combat, but for the most part, this is a straightforward sequence of play without a lot of unique rules to create problems. Solitaire-wise, this is a dedicated solo game with a fully solo allied system, so this makes it an easy 10 out of 10 for solo gameplay. Now, scenario-wise, the game comes with the full scenario at the back here, On to Rome, which is essentially the full game scenario. However, there's also this learning scenario called Onto the Piave, which is a shortened game, so it's 5 turns instead of the full 10 turns, and a number of armies are omitted from the game. So it's always nice. I really appreciate it when we have a learning scenario in a game. Let's take a look at the 234 counters that come with the game. There are 2 sheets, and they are all double-sided with pre-rounded corners, so no need for your counter clipper. Counter size is roughly 11/16 of an inch for each of the counters. Now, Hexasims tend to have colorful counter sets, which I enjoy, and these fill the bill. Basically, this first sheet here that we're looking at now has all of the units in the game. We can see the Italian units here at the top, and then the darker units are the Austrian and German units, and then the French and British units are here, and then we have the garrison units in here for the Italians. The special units like the German heavy artillery and the stormtroops are down here at the bottom. Now this second sheet is essentially all markers. About half of them are the unit damage markers, which designate the 4 different states of casualty levels, so shaken, disrupted, depleted, and broken. And the other half of the markers here are designated, used to designate which side controls the various locations in the map. Now, if we look at one counter, we can get an idea for how gameplay works and some of the things that are going on. So here's one unit from the Italian 1st Armata. We can see the unit designation, 1A, and the letter below designates that this is Unit A out of 6 units in the army. The darker green triangle at the top left helps tag this unit with its specific 1st Armata designation, and they're important because that's how units get activated. You activate units, all the units in the game, by the army that they're in. Below the designation, we can see the unit nationality. The right side of the counter contains the mathy part. The top right has 2 numbers. The larger one, which is on the left side, is a unit's strength points, which is essentially how many dice it'll be throwing in combat. And then the smaller number to the right is the artillery value of the unit, which works in a similar way to the assault value to its left. Now the middle right has the unit's morale value, and the bottom right has its defense. Now, movement in the game is a standard 1 space when a unit moves, and again, it's a point-to-point map, but the cost and activations for a particular movement could be different depending on the terrain and other considerations. There are 4 player aids with the game. The first of these is the main tracker, which tracks the game turn, the order of activation for both sides' forces, activation points that you're going to be using as a central powers player, and then your command assets as the central power player, which are kind of extra activation points you can use during the course of the game. Then down here, we're tracking victory points. And then we have a special track for tracking the dismissal of the Italian General Cadorna, who we'll talk more about shortly. There is also a double-sided aid that lists the events for both sides in the game. So the allied events on one side, and then the central power events on the other side. This third player aid is a key one as it explains how to execute the various allied orders that are possible in the game. The allied card deck that we'll take a look at momentarily will direct you to execute orders for the Italian armies, and this player aid is your reference for how to follow those specific orders for the allies. Lastly, we have a general player aid that has the sequence of play on it and a lot of handy information about the major functions in the game, things like bombardment combat and assault combat, how to execute those, and how you tally up victory points as you're playing. Let's take a look at the cards that come with the game. There are 36 of them, and they are split up into 2 similar 18 card decks. Now, both of these decks are what you use to determine the allied actions in a turn. Basically, you'll draw a card for an activation, look at the activated army, and then follow the orders there. Things like attack, or hold at all costs, or assault, or retire. Now, the interesting part about these two decks is that there is one for each of the two major Italian leaders in the battle. Cadorna and his cards at the top, and then Diaz down here at the bottom. Now, at the start of the game, the Italians used the Cadorna deck, as he was the leader at the start of the battle historically. Now, I'm not sure it can be overstated how horrible of a leader Cadorna is generally considered to have been. During his leadership, he sacked hundreds of Italian officers and was infamous for his rigid discipline. He was so widely despised among the Italian troops that many Italian troops were eager to surrender to the Central Powers during this offensive. Now, so one of the mechanics of this game is that when you get a special action during an Italian activation, a Commando Supremo, during which you take a different series of actions than the regular activation of a normal Italian army. Now, one part of these Commando Supremo activations is that you'll add a point or two to the Cadorna dismissed track. We can see +1/+1/+1 with his little hat here. Eventually, that Cadorna track will fill up, and at that point, you swap out the Cadorna deck for that of the new Italian leader, Diaz. One of the things I'm very curious to see is how this Diaz deck plays differently from the Cadorna deck. One would assume that the Italian and Allied actions will improve a lot as their deck shifts from the generally incompetent Cadorna and to the more effective Diaz. Really neat way, a very interesting way. I think they've built this into the game here. We should also remember the dice. Game comes with 6 dice for your combat systems. Lastly, here is our point-to-point map for the Battle of Caporetto. This is a 22-inch by 33-inch cardstock map representing northern Italy and the site of the campaign. Now, overall, the map to me feels quite functional and easy to use. It might be a bit on the simpler side of things artistically, but certainly feels very, very functional. Now, each area has a symbol depicting the terrain of the region. So we've got cities, plains, mountains, and hills. And then there are transit routes that connect the areas with sometimes bridges across rivers in between as well. And these bridges play a role in gameplay too. Now, the Central Powers and Italians will start off facing each other across these trench lines. And then as the battle progresses, the Central Powers should be pushing the Italians, and eventually the Allies are going to come up here towards this lower part of Italy. Now, the 3 colors, green, yellow, and red, signify how many activation points the Central Powers need in order to execute actions in those areas. The farther they get away from their starting points, the harder it is to keep in operation effective military actions. One of the things that interests me about this game is that you'll be playing a side that is on the high offensive. So you are expected to do well here, but to win the battle, you have to do better than the Central Powers did historically, which means you're going to constantly have to keep up the pressure on the Italians and their allies. I think it'll be a lot of fun to play a game at this scale where you're leading a large-scale operation like this, an offensive like this. Another interesting side note is that there aren't stacking limits in the game, so I'm very curious to see how that works in actual gameplay as well. And there we have it, a look at the 12th Battle from Hexasim Games and designed by Herman Luttmann. The game is available in Europe and elsewhere from Hexasim, but if you live in the United States, you can order the game from GMT Games. Now, I've greatly enjoyed all of Herman's games that I've played, so I'm really eager to get this one to the table. If you like this video, you also might like my overview video of The Plum Island Horror, which is another solitaire game from Herman, where you defend Plum Island from a horde of biological horrors.